Good afternoon, everybody. As you can see, we have some special guests with us today. I want to introduce Ambassador David Satterfield, our special envoy for Middle East humanitarian issues, and Sonali Corday, assistant to the administrator of USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Ambassador Satterfield will make some comments at the top, and then they'll be on hand for some questions, and then I will continue on with the normal daily press briefing. So, Ambassador Satterfield, over to you.
Immediately after Hamas launched its attack on October 7th, President Biden stood strongly with the nation of Israel. As the president has said many times, Israel has a right and a duty to defend itself against Hamas. Hamas committed a massacre. They used rape, sexual violence to terrorize Israeli women. They continue to hold hostages, 133 Americans, women, elderly, injured, and they hide in tunnels they purposely built over the last 16 years under civilian infrastructure, such as hospitals. We remain committed to supporting Israel in its fight against Hamas because we cannot expect Israel to accept a situation we would not, no one would, in which their citizens continue to live under active threat. But at the same time, President Biden, starting on his visit to Israel October 18, was clear. He was clear privately and publicly with the Prime Minister, with the War Cabinet, and then in his comments that Israel must do more to protect civilians, to facilitate the flow of humanitarian assistance into Gaza, and to enable its safe and unhindered distribution inside of Gaza. This is both the morally right thing to do, and it is strategically absolutely necessary. Now, the risk of famine throughout Gaza is very high, especially in the north. We've been very clear. Israel must do everything possible to facilitate efforts to avert famine in Gaza. Now, the president has made this point clear to Prime Minister Netanyahu during his April 4th call. And he also made clear that U.S. policy with respect to Gaza will be determined by our assessment of Israel's actions, immediate actions, to protect innocent civilians and ensure the safety of humanitarian workers, as well as to increase the amount of assistance reaching those in need in Gaza. Far too many Palestinian civilians have been killed and injured. As Secretary Blinken has said, even one innocent casualty is one too many. This conflict has been one of the worst in recent memory in terms of how many humanitarian workers, nearly 250, have been killed since October. Humanitarians should never be a target. Now, since the beginning of the conflict, the U.S. has been leading efforts to get humanitarian assistance into Gaza to alleviate the suffering of innocent Palestinians who have nothing to do with, indeed, are victims themselves of Hamas and its brutal rule. Let's recall, before the president's engagement, there was no food, no water, no medicine getting into Gaza. We are the largest provider of aid to the Gaza response. This is and will continue to be a top priority for the President, for the Secretary, for the United States. Now, over the 6 months past, as a result of our efforts, we have secured the opening of multiple land border crossings, and the volume of assistance entering into and, most importantly, distributed within Gaza has increased significantly. But we know much more aid is needed. And that more aid needs to be done, needs to get out to reach the most vulnerable in Gaza, especially in the north. As their military operations continue, give me a moment, Israel must take all steps to minimize civilian casualties. Protecting civilians is not just a moral obligation. It is that. But it's a strategic imperative. We're coordinating closely with Jordan, Egypt, the United Nations, and various international partners to ensure that these measures translate into real, sustained, long-term relief for the people of Gaza. It is crucial that Israel sees these commitments through, not just today, but every day. Now, to truly address the urgent needs of the civilian population in Gaza, and to enable humanitarian partners to safely distribute life-saving aid throughout Gaza at the scale needed, it's essential to see a ceasefire as part of a hostage deal in Gaza. The path ahead there is straightforward. There could be a 6-week ceasefire today if Hamas would agree to the terms of a deal on the table. It would help bring immediate relief to the people of Gaza. It would also create the conditions needed to enable the urgent humanitarian work that must be done. Hamas, and Hamas alone, is responsible for the failure to return hostages and implement a ceasefire. Now, we're going to continue to work, as we have, to pursue peace, to ensure assistance reaches the most vulnerable, and to ensure that humanitarians delivering assistance are protected from harm. Israelis and Palestinians, like all people, deserve to live in peace. They deserve to experience the quiet miracle of a normal life, which this and previous U.S. administrations have spoken of as our goal. We'll do all we can to be part of the work to make that possible. But I know for all of you, the question exists. We have commitments, the President has spoken, the Prime Minister has offered assurances, but where are we? What is in fact being done on the ground? As I noted, the volume of assistance has increased dramatically over the course of the last several months. Over 200 trucks of assistance per day average, and the numbers on individual days have topped 400, have entered into Gaza. Now, those numbers are important, but even more important than the number of trucks dropping their loads inside Rafah or Kerem Shalom into Gaza is the ability of the humanitarian community, primarily the UN, to distribute assistance within Gaza, to pick it up, take it from warehouses, take it from storage yards, and get it to people in need throughout South, Central, and Northern Gaza. There, too, the numbers have increased significantly to an average of 200 or 200 plus trucks a day in South and Central Gaza, where the bulk of the population, 1.8, 1.9 million people, live. More must be done, though, to ensure that assistance is effectively and efficiently moved, not just in the south and the center, but in the north. The population in the north is in particular threat of malnutrition, wasting, famine. And there, all too little aid had come in until the last several weeks. Aid has been moving now to the north through land corridors from outside Gaza in and from within Gaza north. Nearly 100 trucks a day have been moving to the north over the course of the last several weeks. It is essential that the needs of the people living there be addressed, be assessed accurately. That process will be taking place later this week by the UN. And so we can move beyond counting trucks to focusing, and Sonali can comment on this in detail, on what specific kinds of assistance, specialized feeding, the treatments needed to deal with wasting, to deal with infant, newborn mortality and morbidity, that those can be provided to people in need. Our first priority was, because it had to be, averting famine. But we now need to move on beyond that goal to addressing the true needs: sanitation, availability of medicine, availability of potable water, the specialized care required for these vulnerable populations. That has to be the ongoing focus. Now, Israel has taken significant steps in these last 2.5 weeks. Erez and an additional northern crossing are in the process of being made accessible for the delivery of humanitarian assistance. That was at our request. The so-called Gate 96 crossing into the center of Gaza has been open now for several weeks and is being utilized by the UN to move assistance into Gaza. The Jordan Channel, as we refer to it, Jordanian trucks carrying assistance from the humanitarian hub near Amman directly into Gaza, has also been flowing. For now, through Kerem Shalom into Gaza, but in the near future, directly from Jordan across the river in via Israel to northern crossings and into Gaza for distribution. The JLOTS, the U.S. Maritime Corridor, which Sonali has been working on so hard over these last few weeks, that will also begin operation in early May. We have a significant volume today of assistance moving in by land. We're going to have an increased volume within the predictable next few weeks moving in from land and sea, and that flooding, that additional assistance has brought with it its own logistical challenges. The problem is not getting assistance into Gaza, it's getting it distributed within Gaza. And there the logistical constraints are the lack of sufficient trucks in possession of the UN, something that the UN and we have been working on assiduously over these last weeks to enable a greater logistical capacity to distribute, pick up aid, and move it. And secondly, there are two crossing points, two checkpoints, to and from North Gaza. Those two checkpoints, one on the coastal road, one on an inland road called Salah ad-Din, are now heavily congested with truck movements. That wasn't a problem before. It's a problem now, and it needs to be sorted out so assistance can be moved safely and efficiently up, empty trucks brought south so the cycle can begin again. We're in close touch with the government of Israel, with Israeli authorities, on how best to expedite, along with the UN, these movements. So these challenges still exist. There is still considerable work to be done, but progress has been made. And a final note on something that all of you have heard us speak to and you have asked about: deconfliction and coordination. Too many humanitarian workers have been killed. Too many humanitarian movements have not been able to move effectively and efficiently to their destinations. And so we have worked intensively, and the President discussed this with the Prime Minister, on setting up a mechanism that works in real time between humanitarian actors on the ground, between IDF personnel at checkpoints, at contact points on the ground, and appropriate levels within the IDF structure to enable that efficient, effective, and safe movement of humanitarians, their staff, and the convoys containing assistance. Progress is being made, but more progress still needs to be done to assure that this is in train. To make it work, humanitarian actors need effective communications. They need to be able to talk to the IDF on the ground, talk to command levels of the IDF, and vice versa. We're pleased that progress has been made on availability of appropriate communication systems for humanitarian workers. Lost in the things that need to be done, because those needs are significant, is the fact that we have seen meaningful progress. That progress needs to be sustained, needs to be continued, but the situation has improved, particularly in these last 2 to 3 weeks, from where we would be were I briefing at beginning of April or in the latter part of March. But more needs, more has to be done to meet those needs, has to be sustained. And I'll leave here with one final comment, which is, if you will, editorial. I've been working Arab-Israeli, Palestinian-Israeli issues for over 40 years. For the past 30 years, since September 13th, 1993, the Oslo Agreement, Hamas has had a choice. The choice is to accept what we referred to as the Oslo Principles, then the Quartet Principles, to eschew the use of violence, to accept a negotiated, peaceful settlement to the Palestinian-Israel issue. Hamas has made a choice, but it was not one in favor of a peaceful resolution. Hamas, for its own ideological and political reasons, has chosen in favor of violence, threat, to pursue its own ambitions. The greatest victims of this have been Palestinians themselves, not just the Israelis who were massacred on October 7th in that paroxysm of bestial violence. Hamas still has a choice. The fighting in Gaza, the suffering of the Palestinian people could end tonight if Hamas chose to accept the deal for release of hostages and the establishment of a ceasefire. And that ceasefire could, with further releases, be sustained. But as in the past, Hamas has taken a different course. Let us not lose sight in our correct focus on the requirements incumbent upon Israel to assure all of those humanitarian steps I've just spoken to, that the fundamental actor responsible for the suffering here is a terrorist group, Hamas. Thank you.
Ellen, you want to kick us off?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ambassador. I don't really get a sense exactly of the precise details about how close Israel's compliance has come to the level that President Biden said he wanted to see when he said, policy would be shaped by it allowing humanitarian aid. You talk about 200 trucks a day, but aid groups have said the minimum is 500 trucks a day. And there's, you mentioned communication systems to help with deconfliction. I mean, there was communication systems, if you're talking about actual, the comms.
Is there a question?
Yeah, those were there with the World Central Kitchen. And you talked about negotiations on the comms. Those are two crucial things. How it sounds like it's actually pretty far from meeting the level that's needed. And how long is Israel going to have until to meet that standard?
We work closely with Israel on the commitments made by the Prime Minister to the President. I have outlined many of the steps that have contributed to progress, meaningful progress that has been made. The volume of assistance moving into Gaza is significantly greater over these last weeks than the volume in the months that preceded. The volume of assistance on a daily basis being distributed within Gaza, which is the more important number, that is also on an average at a higher level than in the previous months. More needs to be done. The North has seen, for the first time in all of these 6 months, significant levels of assistance moving in on a daily basis. Is it enough? No, it is not enough, but it is progress. Northern crossings have been opened and are being prepared for opening in the case of Erez and another northern crossing. Ashdod Port. The president said we need to see Ashdod Port open for humanitarian goods, not just flour. Ashdod Port has been opened. That step has been taken. We'll get now into important, but if you will, secondary details. Comms equipment. World Central Kitchen did not have the types of communications systems that could have provided redundancy during that terrible event. It is essential those redundant systems with different technical operating parameters be provided. That is what Israel has now approved. So there is a change that's been made there. Water. President said water has got to be turned back on. There are 3 Mekorot national carrier pipelines into Gaza. The southernmost one has been operating. The second one has been intermittently operating. It has been under active repair because the network from delivery into Gaza through Gaza has been disrupted. The repairs are ongoing. The northern pipeline, which was turned off since October 7th, has been repaired and is functioning now. All of this reflects progress. Northern crossings, Ashdod Port open, the Jordan Channel. It is essential for us that Jordan be able to deliver trucks on a daily basis directly into Gaza. Right now, they are doing so through Kerem Shalom as an interim measure. When the northern crossings are repaired and functional, which we expect will be in the next very few weeks, possibly shorter in the case of Erez, Jordanian trucks will be able to enter there, but they're already moving. And the J-Lots is in final stages of preparation. All of this represents progress. Is there more to do? Yes. But this is a very different picture I am presenting to you than the one we would have had just 3 weeks ago on the eve of the president's call to Netanyahu.
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being here. Just to put a fine point on my colleague's questions, 3 weeks later, can you say you're satisfied with the steps that Israel has taken so far? Has the deconfliction mechanism that you talked about, you said there's progress, is that in place now and is working? And the final thing is about the peer. We're being told U.S. will rely on Israel for security. Can you elaborate on that? Is it going to be security of U.S. troops provided by Israel? Who will distribute the aid inside Gaza? Thank you.
I'll take your last part and turn to Sonali for that, but I am not going to give you, now spare the rest of your colleagues, I'm not going to give you a grade. Did they get an A+, an A or a B? We are in the constant process of monitoring, assessing, facilitating, supporting progress towards the goals the president set. This is not a gotcha test. At 2 p.m. on the 7th of May, will Israel pass or not? This is a set of requirements to help the people of Gaza and the humanitarian workers whose role is vital in facilitating assistance. Progress is being made, but I am not going to stand here and give you a grade on that. More needs to be done. Sonali, you want to talk about JLOTs?
Sure. So just on your question on JLOTs, we're working from USAID, working very closely with CENTCOM to put together the JLOTs and the peer. We're working very closely with the UN to handle the distribution mechanism into Gaza. I'll also say that we are taking a lot of care to respect the UN's neutrality and independence in terms of distribution. Just on your question on security, I think that's best placed to DOD, but suffice it to say that IDF is providing some security and force protection measures to U.S. assets that will be offshore. And I'll have you ask my DOD colleagues further questions on that. Over.
Thanks,
Julie,
Sonali.
go ahead.
Mr. Ambassador, can you talk a little bit more broadly about how you see, since October 7th in particular, the Israeli government's conduct of humanitarian affairs versus Hamas's conduct of humanitarian affairs, broadly speaking?
Excuse me? Hamas's conduct of humanitarian affairs? What do you mean?
For an example, yesterday the State Department released the annual human rights report and featured Israel alongside
I'm
Hamas
not
in
going
the
to
first
comment
page.
on the human rights report or any aspect.
Right, so that's why I'm asking you about the humanitarian conduct of those governments,
Hamas
because they were
has
presented
Yeah,
side
I'll
by
comment
side.
on Hamas. Hamas has spent 17 years in expending every resource provided for the people of Gaza for its own purposes, in constructing a network of military facilities, tunnels embedded in, under, around humanitarian facilities as a deliberate act of preservation and advancement of their interest. Hamas has sacrificed those thousands of innocent Gazans who have been lost after their brutal massacre on October 7th. Again, inconvenient truth. I'm going to keep reminding of that. Something happened on the 7th of October which precipitated all of this. Hamas's humanitarian policy is the opposite of humanitarian. It is to use innocent civilians as shields, as presumed protection for their own facilities, for their own terrorist military forces, and for the plotting and planning, which first and foremost victimizes Palestinians and their future. And how there can be any other consideration of Hamas other than as a terrorist group who has proclaimed, I'll remind, they'll do it again and again and again if given the opportunity. That's Hamas. That's why they're an FTO. Now, with respect to Israel, we require from Israel, because it is the right and moral thing to do, a very different standard of conduct. And as I noted in my remarks, the president made clear on his visit to Israel shortly after October 7th, it's not just strategically important for you to do this, it's the morally right thing to do. It is the reflection of what Israel is, a democracy with values, Does more need to be done? Yes. Could more have been done sooner? Yes, of course. But the point is, over time, progress has been made. With all of the distance that remains to fully meet the humanitarian needs of the people of Gaza, those needs are considerable, progress has been made.
Are you concerned? May I follow up with that real quickly?
We're going to try and get through as many questions.
ABC News. Can you first of all clarify that you have not put a timeline on Israel to take certain steps forward when you talked about potable water, more UN trucks? It sounds like it's more of just a constant discussion that you're having with Israel. Also, has Israel provided assurances that JLOTs will not be in lieu of these land corridors, that they will both remain open?
I'll start with your last one first. We have made clear, and Israel has affirmed to us, that the JLOTs, the maritime corridor,
Yes.
whoever operates it, military or ultimately anyone else, is an adjunct to, it's additive to, supplemental to land corridors. There is no question that the most efficient and effective way to deliver assistance is via as many land corridors as possible, which is why the increase in the operations at Kerem Shalom, the opening of the Gate 96 corridor into the center of Gaza, the preparation for opening of the two new northern crossings, Ashdod port, which is a perfectly functional port with immediate access directly into Gaza. All of those are critical. So yes, it's additive to, it is not a replacement for in any sense of the word. With respect to timing, I think you all know the president must make a determination by May 8th on the NSM 20 issue. I'm not going to get into that question here, but I will say our work is focused every day, every hour on seeing continuous progress made. We are not doing this because there's a deadline on May 8th or any other date certain. We're doing it because every day there are people in need. Every day those needs need to be met.
Said, go ahead.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Mr.
Hi, sir.
Ambassador. I have two quick questions. Would you say that famine that was looming a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, has now been averted? That's one. And second, I mean, this insistence on the 6-week ceasefire, why can't we have a permanent ceasefire? Because the implicit message for the Palestinians is that after 6 weeks, Israel can resume its bombing of Gaza and bombing civilian targets and so on. So why can't we have a permanent ceasefire? Thank you.
I'm not going to get into the details, Said. I hope you will understand of the hostage deal which is presented and not accepted by Hamas, the terms of that deal. This administration has always insisted that a ceasefire is conditioned upon part and parcel of not just a hostage release, but hostage releases. Hamas has it in its hands, not just to effect a first phase release, but further releases which would extend the ceasefire beyond that point. Beyond that, I'm not going to comment. On famine, I'll turn to Sanala.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for that question. So we don't know. Assessments on famine are based on a very rigorous methodology that is undertaken by the IPC, the Integrated Phase Classification, which is the expert body that both collects and reviews data. So we will wait for their determination. What I will say is that in order to address this, we not only need to get trucks in, but we need to get nutritional therapies. We need to reach the moms and kids that are most at risk, especially in northern Gaza. We need to get them clean water. We need to get them health care. I will say that with 29% of children under 2 showing signs of acute malnutrition in northern Gaza, this is what was reported in the IPC, it takes time to reverse that trend. It takes at least 6 weeks to get a child who is suffering the effects of malnutrition back on track. So I don't know that we've averted it. We're certainly trying, but we'll wait for the data and the experts to tell us what they see.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
John Hedren with Al Jazeera English. To what extent will an operation in Rafah affect your ability to get this aid in there? Will it not certainly push back that effort and make things more difficult?
John, you know the position which White House, State have expressed, Secretary Alston as well. We could not support a Rafah ground operation without an appropriate, credible, executable humanitarian plan precisely because of the complications for delivery of assistance, and then on top of that, the consequences of displacement of the hundreds of thousands of Rafans already multiply displaced. Where do they go? How will their needs be met? Shelter, medicine, water, sanitation. Rafah itself today poses significant challenges in all of these areas. The compression of population, whatever the number may today be, 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 million, poses enormous challenges: shelter, sanitation, water. To move them again under kinetic circumstances would complicate that enormously. It's for all of these reasons that we have been as clear as we have been with the government of Israel. And that's not just a past tense discussion. It is a current sense. We continue discussions with Israel on what we believe are alternate ways of addressing the challenge which we recognize, which is Hamas military present in Rafah. We get it. We understand it. But we think there are other ways to deal with this. And if there is not a credible, executable humanitarian plan, then we cannot support a ground operation.
But fair to say that Israel views that differently up till now.
That's our position.
Go ahead, Elizabeth, and then these guys got to wrap.
I want to follow up on the pier. How will the U.S. ensure the safety of aid workers who are concerned over the Israeli military's presence in the area and role securing it, given the past failures in deconfliction? And also, will Israel's so-called dual-use restrictions be applied to goods entering the pier?
Sure. So what I can say is that there are conversations happening every single day between our humanitarian assistance team, the DART in Jerusalem, CENTCOM on the ground, and our UN partners on the ground. The safety and security of our humanitarian partners is the most important thing. It's absolutely vital, and they need to feel safe and secure. I'm not going to get into specific security measures on what's being discussed for obvious reasons, but just to say that those are happening, and we're very cognizant, again, as I said earlier, that the UN needs to maintain its principles of neutrality and independence and access throughout Gaza. So we are trying to abide by those principles and make sure that everyone involved has the safety and security that they need.
And the dual-use goods?
I'll defer to Ambassador Satterfield on dual use. Oh, I can take dual use. So again, so the goods will be inspected in Cyprus by Israelis, but also by a team which will include the UN, our colleagues in Cyprus. The dual use concerns are being discussed. There should be a consistency on what goes in. So we're not trying to create like an exception for Cyprus, just to say that we continue to have conversations with our Israeli colleagues to streamline the process for inspecting and approving goods that are sensitive or on the dual use list.
Michelle, go ahead.
I have two questions. First, did the U.S. ask Qatar to expel Hamas leaders from there? Second, are you preparing for humanitarian emergencies in case a full-scale war breaks between Hezbollah and Israel?
Easiest ones yet. First answer is no. The second is, in the great tradition of those standing at this podium, I don't comment on hypotheticals.
Laura, you had your hand up in the back. Yes, you, Laura Rosen. Did you not have your hand up?
No.
Oh, okay. All right. Go ahead, Doc.
Okay, yeah. I want to know about Egypt's role and about giving relief for the Gazans to be able to go into Egypt. Is Egypt open to taking a lot of the people to Gaza to go out through that into a safe area so that Israel can deal with the Hamas battalions?
I'll comment first, and this is long-standing commentary. We believe the future of the Palestinian people of Gaza lies in Gaza, not anywhere else. Egypt has made very clear, preceding October 7th, that they also believe the future for Palestinians lies in Gaza, not in Egypt. We understand that point. We respect it. So does the government of Israel.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Are you in touch with the Palestinian organizations like the Red Crescent
as far as with these updated comms, and because we've seen, medics, for example, attacked as well by the Israelis. So
There's a humanitarian hub at El Arish in which UN agencies are represented, and of course the Egyptian Red Crescent runs that hub in close coordination for delivery of bilateral assistance, non-UN assistance, through the PRCS. And so with respect to our focus on comms, that has been directed primarily at the UN family of agencies, rather than at Palestine Red Crescent Society. But Sonali, any further comment on that?
I think you've got it.
Yep.
And one more question. We haven't seen too many briefings with you. Should we expect more opportunities to ask you some questions?
You haven't seen them because I have been all but about 25 days of the last 6.5 months in the region working the actual issues.
Yeah.
So I can't promise for the future, but thank you.
Final question. Go ahead.
Regarding the maritime corridor from the Republic of Cyprus, do you have any updates about any possible logistic challenges, or how we move forward with that plan?
I'm sorry, I think I lost that second word about any logistics.
The maritime corridor from Cyprus, from the Republic of Cyprus to Gaza to provide humanitarian aid?
Yeah, so the update that I can give you is that we are proceeding apace and on schedule, working very closely with CENTCOM. We have colleagues in Cyprus, the government of Cyprus. We have a coalition of partners working around this, the EU, the UK, and then we're also working with CENTCOM and Israeli colleagues to set up the assistance and the beach landing spot in Gaza. And critically, we're working with UN partners to handle the distribution of assistance going into Gaza. Again, this is a humanitarian initiative. We're keeping it in line with humanitarian principles, and we hope to have more updates for you on this soon.
Can I ask more questions about JLOTS? We haven't had a chance to ask anything in the past.
If you want to ask one more question about JLOTS, then
Sure, thank you. Thank you. Can you tell me, are things still in discussion, or is there an agreement that the WFP will actually handle the distribution part of it? Is there an agreement on the rules of engagement with the IDF? And is the deconfliction aspect handled to your satisfaction so that you're confident that the aid workers will actually be protected as they work with the people with JLOTS?
So yes, we have an agreement with the UN and WFP to work on the logistics. As I said, this is we're working out a lot of details on how this is going to work. The partners are working on the security aspects of it, as you mentioned. Again, I don't want to comment on that here, just for very obvious reasons, to protect their security. So all of these issues are being worked through. Again, I'll reemphasize that the key principle for the UN's engagement here is to protect their independence and neutrality and ability to access vulnerable populations throughout Gaza. We are working to make sure that they feel comfortable in upholding those principles. I think the conversations are going ahead really well. Just again, on specific issues around deconfliction and protection, I will ask that you defer those conversations for DoD colleagues. Deconfliction is an issue for all humanitarian workers working in Gaza. It's not just a JLOTS issue. As Ambassador Satterfield said, some steps have been made to improve the system, which obviously had some failures given the World Central Kitchen attack, but also we have lost over 200 humanitarian workers through the course of this war. We need to see those steps be implemented in the humanitarian community, and IDF continue to talk and engage and iterate and improve the system so that everyone feels safe and secure in this very difficult operating environment.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
Ambassador Satterfield, Administrator Corey, thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
joining
much.
us today.
We can do Zoom press conferences if you're out of region. This is very helpful.
Thank you.
right. Okay. Give me 2 seconds, guys. All right. Well, that was very glad we were able to have them join us today. Ellen, you want to kick us back off?
What to ask?
We could also stop if that really that quenched your thirst. I'm happy to go. Go ahead.
I guess, obviously there's been lots of anticipation about the Leahy law decisions that are expected. There's been reporting that there were recommendations for some IDF units to be identified as in violation of the Leahy amendments, but that the secretary opted not to take staff's recommendation for several of the units. Can you comment on that?
So I think I'm going to echo what you saw Matt and the secretary address as it relates to this question beginning in Capri on Friday, which is I'm just not going to get ahead of this process. What I will say is that we take the Leahy law incredibly seriously. It is also the standards of it we apply consistently across the board with all countries in which we have security relationships with. That should be no surprise to anybody, but I am not going to get ahead of the process, and I am sure we'll have more to say in the time forthcoming. Humaira?
Yesterday, I think Matt said on UNRWA, you guys haven't had a chance to review it. You were still reviewing it. Do you have like an assessment on the Colonna report's findings?
So, as it relates to the report that former French Foreign Minister Colonna took the lead on, we first take a step back. We welcome and strongly support the recommendations of the independent review of UNRWA mechanisms and procedures related to neutrality. This was released yesterday. We continue to look closely at the report and are assessing how we can continue to work with partners in the region, host authorities, and the government of Israel to implement some of these recommendations. We, of course, continue to support UNRWA's important work. It must continue. But at the same time, we continue to advocate for reforms, and we welcome what the former French foreign minister laid out.
So is given the language, the language in the supplemental that's about to pass and how it prohibits the resumption of U.S. funding, is it fair to say until at least like 2025 there is no chance that U.S. would be able to resume funding for UNRWA?
You've heard me say this before. As we assume this supplemental passes, when it passes the Senate, we will be an administration that complies with the law, and the law is very clearly laid out in the national security supplemental as it relates to what kind of relationship the United States can have with UNRWA. We're continuing to engage with partners in the region, with UN agencies and other humanitarian organizations about the important work when it comes to humanitarian aid. It's also really important to note that there is a significant amount of monies for humanitarian aid in the supplemental, including humanitarian aid into Gaza, and so we'll continue to pursue those lines of effort.
And the report also found that Israel was yet to present any evidence for the accusation that hundreds of UNRWA staff were members of terrorist groups. Is the U.S. going to be encouraging Israel to provide that evidence? Are you going to do anything towards that end?
So our understanding is that the United Nations is continuing to pursue an investigation as it relates to that relates to the individuals alleged to have participated in the October 7th terrorist attacks, and so I will not going to get ahead of that process.
Okay, and the final thing is you must have seen the reports about mass graves containing hundreds of bodies around Al-Shifa. UN chief said he was horrified by these reports. I'm wondering if U.S. has a comment on this and whether you guys have raised this with the Israeli government.
We have seen those reports, and the reports are incredibly troubling, and we're inquiring on this with the government of Israel.
Specifically on that.
Correct. I don't have any specific information to offer, insight into what this is or isn't. I don't have a sense of that from up here, but we are inquiring about this with the government of
Do you know
Israel.
who you reached out to who? Is it
I'm not going to speak to the specifics, but it should be no surprise to you that we engage with the government of Israel at all levels, often many times, multiple times a day, at all hours. And go
So
ahead.
Ambassador Satterfield seemed pretty pleased with how Israel's progressing. Has the U.S. shared with Israel what would happen if Israel takes its foot off the pedal with regards to humanitarian aid? And then also a question on Ukraine. UK has already beaten us to the punch, biggest military package ever. Can you characterize if the U.S. package to Ukraine is going to look to be, is it shaping up to be the biggest ever?
Let me take that in two parts. First, I'm not sure pleased is the appropriate adjective that I would use. I think Ambassador Satterfield was pretty clear that there's been some clear metrics for progress that have been made over the past number of weeks. Those are welcome steps, and they are things that we are very happy to see. However, he was also explicitly clear that there continue to be areas, specifically distribution of aid within Gaza, some of the telecommunication measures that he mentioned, sanitation and other areas, deconfliction. Those are our areas that we want to and need to continue to see sustained progress, including the sustained progress on the steps that have been made in the right direction. And as it relates to a deadline or anything like that,
But is there a consequence?
The secretary and the president were incredibly clear that these are kinds of steps that we absolutely need to see, or it will have a determining factor as it relates to the kinds of policy we pursue as it relates to Gaza. There has not been a change in that assessment. We expect that these kinds of efforts to be continued and sustained. The situation is still dire. Both things can be true, which is something that we've kind of been pretty clear about for quite some time now. We can see steps being taken that we think are beneficial to the overall humanitarian aid ecosystem. Stuff like the Ashdod port opening, some of these northern crossings being opened. These are all good, welcome, positive steps in the right direction. Simultaneously, there continues to be a lot of work that needs to be done. On Ukraine, look, first let me just say, as it relates to our partners in the United Kingdom, we welcome any country taking additional steps to support our Ukrainian partners and bolster the transatlantic alliance. My understanding is that this was an announcement not just about support for Ukraine, but also the United Kingdom committing to contribute 2.5% of their GDP towards the defense space by 2030. Again, a step that we think is in line with NATO commitments, but also, again, something that bolsters the transatlantic alliance. So very, very glad and happy to see that news. When it comes to the United States, we have not been shy about the fact that one of the key reasons we need this national security supplemental passed is because we need to continue to support our Ukrainian partners. We are going to wait for, I'm sure, final passage before previewing or talking about any additional next steps when it comes to how we might be supporting our Ukrainian partners. Go ahead, Saeed.
Thank you. Going back to Humaira's question, just to follow up on that. Now, it seems that more than 300 bodies have been found. The United Nations is asking or calling for an independent investigation. Would you support such an independent investigation?
Right now, Saeed, we are asking for more information.
Right.
That is squarely where we're leaving the conversation. Right. I don't have any details to match, confirm, or offer as it relates to that. We're aware of those reports, and we have asked the government of Israel for additional clarity and information, and that's where I'm at.
I understand. If Secretary General Guterres asks for your support, in this effort? Would the United States support him? in
You
the
are
pursuit
you're asking about a
Okay.
hypothetical, Saeed, which again, I'm not going to get ahead of until we have greater fidelity on information as to what this is, and we're hoping to get that from the government of Israel as soon as possible.
All right. Now, Israel is said to be expanding the so-called safe zone in Gaza as it prepares to invade Rafah. I wonder if you've seen the report, and if you have any comment on that.
I've not seen that report, Saeed. But look, any kind of action that it would be inconsistent with what we'd consider the forced relocation or the forced movement or eviction of Palestinians from their homes in Gaza is something that is inconsistent with the principles that Secretary Blinken laid out in Tokyo last December. And a key tenet of that continues to be that there can be no forced relocation. Ellen, you had your hand up.
I was just going to say on the issue of investigating or finding out the truth of the allegations of the mass grave, the State Department's Human Rights Report yesterday said along the lines of it knew of no instances where Israeli officials had brought accountability basically for crimes alleged in Gaza. In those circumstances, I mean, with that kind of determination by the State Department itself, is waiting for Israel to investigate it the appropriate course of action?
So that's not first, I think we should clarify what the Human Rights Report is and isn't. It isn't a determination or an assessment by the State Department. What it is a compilation of submitted violations of human rights all around the world that are done in close coordination with our embassies and consulates and all the places that we have them, with civil society organizations, with media organizations. That's how that report is compiled. I will also note that it is not an exhaustive or a list of every single human rights violation in the world. It is a compilation. But you saw the Secretary speak to this a little bit yesterday. First, as it relates to our own system, when it comes to violations of human rights, there are processes and protocols and procedures in place for the United States to assess what is happening on the ground. These are thorough, deliberate, detail-oriented processes that can take time. Those processes are ongoing, and we'll continue that work as we continue that work in any conflict zone around the world. Simultaneously, I'm sure our partners in Israel can speak to any procedures and parameters they have in place in their own system as it relates to things that would be viewed as violations, and I'll let them speak to that. Alex, on the region or something else? Let me stay a little bit on the region. I'll come back to you. Michelle, you had your hand up.
On Iran. Al Jarida newspaper, a Kuwaiti newspaper, has quoted a high-level source in the Iranian Supreme National Security Council saying that Tehran received an American letter offering to resume negotiations to resume the nuclear agreement after reaching security understandings. And the source added that the offer includes promises to cancel a large portion of economic and non-economic sanctions if Tehran cooperates in restricting its atomic activity and regional pacification. Can you confirm this report?
Michelle, I'm not going to comment on our ways of communicating with Iran, except to say we are not in direct talks with Iran on the JCPOA, either in New York or anywhere else.
Indirect talks.
What's that?
Are you in direct talks with Iran?
I just said that we are not in direct talks with Iran.
Indirect, not direct.
I'm not going to speak to any of our communicating ways of communicating with Iran.
And one on Israel-Lebanon, the war is escalating between Hezbollah and Israel on the border. Do you expect a full-scale war between the two sides? And what can you say about the U.S. efforts to find a diplomatic solution for this crisis?
We are continuing to engage in direct conversations with our partners in Israel and other regional partners to avoid any kind of massive, dire escalation. As we know, Israel has this challenge of defeating Hamas in Gaza, but simultaneously is dealing with the threat from Hezbollah in the north. And Israel, of course, has every right to defend itself and right to its security. But we have been clear with everyone that we possibly can that it's from the United States point of view, we're not interested in seeing this escalate. But I don't have any other thing to offer on the process there. On the Middle East or anything else? Go ahead.
So yesterday, the special report about human rights indicated that the Iranian regime had terrorist activities and also put pressure on Iran international journalists, my colleagues. So in one occasion, they had to move their office from London to Washington, D.C. So do you have any comment on that? Because this is a serious attack on journalists who are working in the United States and also in the UK.
Yeah.
And they are my colleagues, and they are concerned about it.
So first, let me just say I'm not going to comment on any particular report or any particular anecdote laid out in the human rights report, but it should be no surprise to anybody that Iran continues to be one of the largest exporters of terrorism and has been so since 1979. Simultaneously, it is also a regime that has showed blatant disregard to a free and open press and media environment. And you have seen over the course of the past 3 years alone a serious crackdown within Iran on civil society, on media organizations, on human rights. We will continue to take steps to hold the Iranian regime accountable for its human rights violations, for other malign activities, and we'll continue to do that.
And one follow-up.
I'm going to work the room. Go ahead. Yeah.
According to Jewish press and Middle East Forum reports, the U.S. State Department has announced that it will take legal steps against the Israeli Army's unit known as the Netzah Yehuda Battalion, based on reports that the U.S. gets from Dawn, which
we've spoken to this pretty regularly since Friday, and your colleague just asked about it at the beginning of the press briefing, so I would ask you pay attention. But I will just reiterate what I said, which is that we're not going to get ahead of our determinative or deliberative processes here. We take our role and responsibility as it relates to implementation of the Leahy Law quite seriously. Its standards are applied consistently to all countries who we have security relationships with, but I don't have any announcement.
Well, this is a follow-up to this. According to U.S. State Department website report, the U.S. has declared that it will take action against those who undermine peace, security, and stability in the West Bank, which undermine the national security and foreign policy objectives of the United States, including the viability of the two-state solution. So does that mean that the U.S. will take action against Arabs who raise millions to support any Arab who murders a Jew, or take action against the Palestinian Authority for the pay for slave, for the pay salary for life to any Arab who murders a Jew, and finally take action against the Palestinian Ministry of Education, whose new curriculum indoctrinates Palestinian Arabs to destroy Israel?
So I see you're trying to connect a couple different threads there. First, the sentence that you quote from, you're talking about actions that the United States took in response to violence, extremism that we are seeing in the West Bank. And yes, that absolutely is a detractor from peace and stability in the region. It's a detractor from Israel's own security. It takes us further away from a two-state solution. And as you saw, we won't hesitate to take appropriate actions to actors who partake in that kind of activity. Simultaneously, when it comes to the PA, which is what I think you're referring to, issues like the so-called martyr payments are something that we have raised regularly in our engagements with the PA. It is a tenet of the kinds of reform that we are continuing to insist the Palestinian Authority undertake, and we'll continue to have those kinds of conversations. In the back, go ahead.
So on the reforms, today the new Palestinian Prime Minister announced a new package of reforms designed to strengthen the Palestinian Authority, and it seems like largely these reforms were the same as promised by the previous Prime Minister. Has the United States, has the State Department been in touch with the Palestinian Authority about these reforms that we're announcing?
We have conversations with appropriate members of the PA regularly. I don't have any conversations to read out, but broadly, reform is something that we have stressed and made clear to them as part of the broader conversations we continue to have for peace and stability in the region. But I'm happy to check if we have had any more specific engagements on this news.
Are you familiar with the?
I've seen the reports. I've not. I think it broke right before I came out, so I haven't had an opportunity to look into it. But we're happy to check with the team. Go ahead. Yes, to you.
Thank you so very much. Regarding the recent sanctions by United States on Pakistan.
I'm going to see if there's anything else on the Middle East before we come to any other topics.
So regarding the recent diplomatic push by the United States towards Saudi Arabia and Israel about normalization ties. So do you think so with the ongoing circumstances, what is the line of action you have as Netanyahu is not even bothering United States regarding the aid measures, regarding the ceasefire, regarding the hostages deals, and meanwhile you have many Israeli politicians you hosted here just for another attempt, a possible house change in the Israeli Knesset. So what is the line of action you have?
We've been pretty clear that we think further integration of Israel into the Middle East region is in better. It's in better interest of Israel's security. It's in better interest for the United States, and it is a further way for us to push back against Iran's malign and destabilizing behavior. Of course, there is important work that still needs to be done as it relates to that integration, including, of course, ensuring that we can get to a place for a negotiated two-state solution, and those conversations continue to be ongoing. Anything else on the Middle East before I close out? I'll come to you after. Go ahead.
Yesterday, Secretary Blinken released the human rights reports, and he said in his speech that, in quotes, we repeatedly have pressed concerns about Palestinian civilians' access to humanitarian assistance, displacements of the majority of the population in Gaza, and unprecedented number of journalists killed, in quote. So actually, one of the journalists killed in Gaza was one of our colleagues working for Anadolu Agency of Turkey. His name is Mustafa Al-Karuf. And I want to ask a journalist, what would be your message to Israeli government, Israeli military to protect the journalists working in Gaza?
Our message to the government of Israel is the same message it is to any government on the face of this planet, which is that journalists need to be protected. They do important work. They do especially important work in conflict zones where they shed light on what is happening on the ground, often in circumstances where it is not easy for public to get their information or get a sense of what is happening. And somewhere like Gaza, they do critical work of informing people about what's going on. And so our message everywhere is journalists, media organizations absolutely need to be protected. You had your hand up in the back. Go ahead.
I did. Thanks for that. I just wanted to circle back to what one of our colleagues asked, which was in relation to the mass graves story. My colleague referred to calls for an independent investigation, and you said that you were asking for more information from the government of Israel, and that is squarely where we're leaving the conversation. Why is there resistance to supporting an independent investigation into how 300 people ended up in a mass grave?
It's not about resistance to this particular situation. It is me not wanting to speak in detail about something which Saeed posed as a hypothetical question, when from the United States perspective, I don't have any additional information on this, aside from the public reporting that Humaira and Saeed and others have asked about, which is a fair question. But what I am saying from the United States perspective is that we've seen those reports and we are asking the government of Israel for more details and more information.
And do you believe that the government of Israel is a credible source in enlightening you on that?
We do.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Regarding the human rights report from yesterday, particularly the chapter of Colombia, Section 4, corruption in government, you made references specifically to an episode or an issue, and it's the investigations from the attorney's office in Colombia towards President Gustavo Petro's son and his brother because of irregular payments that allegedly entered his presidential campaign. Why did you make reference or relate to corruption, this issue that hasn't been solved yet, by the Colombian authorities are taking into account that is so sensitive because it targets directly Petro's campaign?
So again, in the context of the Middle East, I will apply the same context here. I'm not going to speak to specific entries in the Human Rights Report. I will just say again that this is a compilation of various human rights violations that we've seen that are input by our embassies and consulates, that are input by civil society and nonprofit organizations and media organizations.
Yes.
And I will just leave it at that. And I'm happy to check more on the specifics of this, but I don't have any.
Just to follow up, do you have any credible, reasons to believe that there are irregular payments that enter into the Petro's campaign?
What I can say about the entries of the Human Rights Report is that we find them to be credible, which is why we have included them. Go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah.
United States imposes sanctions on suppliers to Pakistan's ballistic missile program. What was the real reason for these sanctions?
The sanctions were made because these were entities that were proliferators of weapons of mass destruction and the means of their delivery. These were entities based in the PRC in Belarus, and that we have witnessed to have supplied equipment and other applicable items to Pakistan's ballistic missile program. They are following our October 23rd designation of other 3 PRC entities who've worked to supply Pakistan's missile program. We're going to continue to disrupt and take actions against proliferation networks and concerning weapons of mass destruction procurement activities wherever they may occur.
The Iranian president was in Pakistan, and during his visit, Pakistan and Iran signed 8 MOUs and also agreed to push bilateral trade to $10 billion. A Pakistani government spokesperson also said that it does not need a waiver from U.S. sanctions to build its portion of a Pak-Iran gas pipeline. How does the United States view these agreements and statements?
So first, just let me say broadly, we advise anyone considering business deals with Iran to be aware of the potential risk of sanctions. But ultimately, the government of Pakistan can speak to their own foreign policy pursuits. Alex, go ahead. I'm going to work the room a little bit. Alex, go ahead.
A few quick answers from me. Let me get a reaction to today's Moscow court hearing on Evan Gershkovich. His appeal has been rejected. Do you have anything to say?
We, of course, are incredibly disappointed that Evan has been in pretrial detention for over a year without any clear justification from Russian authorities. Members of the embassy team in Moscow attended Evan's appeal hearing today. Candidly, though, Alex, Russia should stop using individuals like Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan, who has also been detained for 5 years, as bargaining chips. Evan and Paul should be released immediately.
Thank you. On Georgia, wondering if you're able to keep your eyes on the ball given the recent developments. Today is the 9th day of the protests. But we also see that ruling party has announced its own counter-protest, and they also arrested a protester from last week. They are flirting with pro-Russian CPAC group. Do you see any happy ending there?
So look, Alex, as it relates to protests, we certainly support what in the United States would be an expression of the people's rights under the First Amendment to peacefully protest and demonstrate. Our call and our push, of course, continues to be that they be peaceful, and certainly would condemn any steps that are taken for these kinds of protests to become violent. But Alex, I think this goes back to the draft law that you and I have been speaking about for a number of weeks now. We continue to find that this kind of legislative activity to be deeply problematic and inconsistent with what one would think EU aspirations. You have to remember, we're talking about something that cracks down on media organizations, civil society organizations, and other things. And I see so many people leaving the room, I'm going to go ahead and call it today. Thanks, everybody.
Final questions?
No, thank you.